Okay, we can start in a few minutes, but just before we start, I'd like to just say to everybody that you can, put questions into the chat room, or you can email us questions. If we don't have time to answer questions this evening, we can answer them tomorrow and get and email you our responses. So for all of you who have joined us, you're all very welcome. And my name is Joyce Cairns, and I'm from Neuron Learning. And these are my contact details in case anybody would like to contact me afterwards, or email me, or make an appointment to talk with me about their own children. You can go to calendly.com/Joyce Cairns, and you can choose a time that suits you best for us to talk. Okay, so well, tonight's talk is about dyslexia and how to accelerate your child's language, reading and learning skills. We're going to cover a number of sorry, just one second. Okay, I'm just going to share my screen with everybody. I think you're not seeing it there. Right, okay. So, okay, so I'll give you my contact details at the end again, just in case you missed them there. So tonight's talk is mainly about dyslexia, and we're going to talk about the learning timeline, the 4 cognitive skills. We're going to talk about language, reading and learning, and how to help your children to learn better. And the Neuron Learning, and we're also going to talk about the Neuron Learning home course and the products we use to help children learn. Okay, so let's start with the learning timeline. Well, it starts with listening. So our kids need to be able to listen well, and they need to be able to understand what they're listening to. They also need to have speech, good speech, and the ability to tell stories, verbal storytelling. We also need the kids to be able to read and understand what they're reading. And writing is a very important part of the learning timeline. And of course, it all leads to learning. The cognitive skills we're going to talk about are memory, attention, processing, and sequencing. And we're going to go into a lot of detail on the cognitive skills this evening. And processing speed and processing accuracy, it all really starts there. So let's start with, actually, I'm going to give you all a little exercise. It's a working memory exercise. And so I would like you to try and figure out what this guy's name is. I would ask you not to use a pen and paper. Try to work this out in your head. And the clue or the clues are 12, 21, 3, and 1. I'm going to give you a very, very quick other clue. And yes, I know. So listening, when our children listen, they have to process what they're listening to, and they have to take in what is being said as it's being said. And many of our children with dyslexia have poor processing skills, or their processing might be slower than it should be. So it's very difficult then for them to process what's being said as it's being said. And also it can be difficult for them to process it accurately. When we speak with parents, we often ask them if their children with dyslexia, when they're listening, do they find it difficult to focus? Do they misinterpret what's being said? Do they need repetition? Can they take instruction? And very often some kids will struggle with one or more of these listening skills. So we need to build up their ability to process what's being said as it's being said and process it accurately. Now, if a child's processing is too slow, it means he's not able to take in everything that's being said. And also it can mean that he might misinterpret a sound within a word, or he might misinterpret a word. So, for example, he might, if he heard the word say, he might think it was stay because it's taken him too long to process the two sounds s and a, and there was a gap between those two sounds. And so it seems to him like another sound has been inserted. So he might register something like stay or spay instead of say. And so he goes off on a little tangent thinking the teacher is talking about stay or X and the teacher is talking about Y. So now he loses concentration. So that's 2 cognitive skills. He's not processing what's being said, or he's not processing some of what's being said accurately. So now he loses concentration. And also, if a child can't take in what's being said, he loses concentration, he's not going to remember it. So the working memory isn't engaged, and he can't absorb what's being said if he's not processing it in the first place. So we have to build up those processing skills, processing speed, processing accuracy. We have to build up the working memory so he can absorb what's being said. And we have to build up the concentration so that he can stay with the teacher from the beginning of the lesson to the end of the lesson. So the concentration is very important, but also sustained attention is very important. To stay with the teacher from the beginning of the lesson to the end of the lesson, or from the beginning of the class to the end of the class. And often kids are exhausted by the end of the day because it's been very difficult for them to process what's being said all day long and to concentrate and to maintain that sustained attention in each lesson. So it takes endurance as well. So we need to build up these skills. In school, by the end of primary school, and certainly in secondary school, 80% of what our kids do in school all day is listen to the teacher. From about 3rd class on in Ireland, or grade 3, or year 4 in the UK, the curriculum cranks up a few notches and the focus shifts from a very visual learning experience to an auditory or a listening experience. So as the kids come to the end of primary school, and certainly in secondary school, most of their day is spent listening. And if they can't process everything, and if they can't remember everything and concentrate while they're listening in class, it's very tiring, it's very taxing. So earlier I asked you about to do this exercise. It's a working memory exercise. So I asked you to do it without using a pen and paper, and try and make out what this little fellow's name is. And so it's each number here represents a letter. So the 12th letter in the alphabet is L. The 21st letter in the alphabet is U. The 3rd letter in the alphabet is C. And the first letter is A. So this boy's name is Luca. Now, you were engaging your working memory to work out all of that, to try and keep the first piece of information, the L, in your head while you worked out the second bit of information, which was U, and the third and the fourth. So that's a working memory exercise. And we use our working memory to manipulate information in our head and remember it. But we also use our working memory in the moment. So all of you listening to me now are using your working memory to absorb what's being said as I'm saying it. And at the end of this webinar, you'll remember some of it. You won't remember all of it, but it's your working memory that will allow you to remember what it is that you will remember. So his name is Luca. Okay, so speech and storytelling. So everything starts with listening, even with our babies, it starts with listening. And one thing I didn't mention there was that in school or in class, taking instruction is a very important part of listening as well. And that requires good sequencing. So if a teacher gives an instruction like, I don't know, take out your geography book, open page 10, read page 10, and then answer questions 2, 3, and 4 on page 11. That's a very difficult instruction to process, first of all, to sequence which book, which page, which questions, and to remember. So for children who are struggling, who have dyslexia, an instruction like that could be quite difficult, and it wouldn't be unusual for a teacher to give that to a class of 11-year-olds, 12-year-olds and up. So when we move on to speech, with speech, we have to process our thoughts, we have to sequence our thoughts, we have to structure our sentences with a beginning, middle, and an end. We have to think of the words we want to use, so we have to have good vocabulary. We have to think of the grammar we're going to use, and we have to remember, we have to keep the information in our head long enough to deliver it, and we have to deliver it in a fluent and fluid way. So if processing skill, if cognitive skills are poor or not as good as they should be, telling a story can be very difficult. And a lot of our children might not tell a story with a beginning, middle, and an end, or they might not use vocabulary that's age appropriate. They might keep things basic. So sometimes storytelling, sentence structure and story structure, children may struggle with that because it's very hard to sequence it or synopsize what you want to say if you're describing something that has happened, and deliver it with a beginning, middle, and an end. So that's a sequencing thing, but it's also a processing thing. A lot of children may ramble because, it has no beginning, middle, and an end. And some kids might go off point. Other kids might rush what they want to say because they're afraid that they'll forget it. So they rush it to try and get it out before it is forgotten. And some children might repeat some words like or or they might use phrases like and then. Some kids might even stutter, and sometimes that's because they're trying to buy time while they process or while they try to figure out what it is that they want to say. So it can really have an impact on not just their storytelling, but their social communications and negotiations. So some children find it difficult to interact socially, and it can, if we take an example of children in a playground, and if my Luca is struggling to process, and there's lots of noise in the background, kids running around, playing, laughing, shouting, that kind of thing, and Luca's in a conversation with 2 or 3 other children, and they're talking about something like, I don't know, soccer, the World Cup or something like that. And child number 1 says something about the match he watched at the weekend. Child number 2 said something about the match that he watched yesterday. And child number 3 talks about something else because she has no interest in soccer, whatever. So while Luca is trying to process what child number 1 is saying, child number 2 has started talking, and he hasn't processed everything that child number 1 has said yet. And so he then misses some of what child number 2 says, and also can miss some of what child number 3 says. So he can, and at the same time, he's trying to figure out what he's going to contribute to the conversation. So he's trying to process his own thoughts, and he's trying to figure out, well, what am I going to add to this? What have I to say? And it can be really difficult to process his own thoughts while he's trying to process what is being said. So it can lead to communication and negotiation difficulties in a social setting. Some kids might insist on leading the play. For example, if kids are making up rules to games, it's easier to follow the rules in your own head than follow the rules that everyone else is dictating, because it's very hard to process them as the kids are dictating them, and it's very hard to remember them and concentrate. So sometimes kids like to lead the play, and it can sometimes mean that kids get upset or they struggle to negotiate. You know, they want to play it by their rules because they can understand it. Behavior can become an issue. And so it can become very difficult socially as well, sometimes for kids who have dyslexia. Now, reading, there are three parts to reading. It starts with decoding and it ends with comprehension. And our children in primary school are learning to read. In secondary school, they're reading to learn. So for reading, we need to decode. And to decode, we need to know the code. And to know the code can be really difficult. And to learn the code can be really difficult. So we need to have good cognitive skills so we can process the code, we can access the code, and then we can learn the code, and then we can decode the code. And when we're decoding or when we're trying to make out words or sounds within words, we need to be able to do it quickly so that we can engage the working memory while we're reading, and we can take in what it is that we're reading and we can understand it. So again, that working memory is very important for taking in what it is that we're reading. Many children struggle because they lack phonemic awareness, and that could be down to poor processing. They're not processing the sounds, the vowel sounds, the blended sounds, the initial consonant sounds of words, the final consonant sounds of words. They might be misreading or skipping words or guessing words because they're not recognizing words quickly enough. They might be leaving out bits of words, like the suffixes, the bits that we add on at the end of words, like the ed or the ing, or the prefixes at the beginning of words. For example, in a word like untie or re-enter, it can be very difficult for kids to just register that there is a root word, but there's something added to it, either at the end or at the beginning. And sometimes reading, when you read with kids with dyslexia, it's like they don't even see the endings or the beginning of words, and they'll just read the root words. You'd often see them skipping words or guessing words. So the decoding becomes a problem. And vocabulary, it's very hard to build up their vocabulary if they're not able to read well. And they become very reluctant to use vocabulary in speech as well, new vocabulary, in case they use it in the wrong context. Because depending on a child's age, it can be a source of ridicule if a child doesn't use a word correctly. Sorry, we're just checking here to see if we're sharing my slides. Okay, all right. So reading comprehension means that we're understanding what we're reading. But more than that, we have to be able to read between the lines. We have to be able to get the subtleties and the nuances and the inferences in language, because very often it's not what's written down in black and white. A question could be, if you've read some text, a question could be, what do you think a person is feeling, or something like that. And it may not be written down there in black and white for the child to go and get the answer. So we need to be able to read and also read between the lines. And that's a processing exercise, because it means that if we have good processing, we're able to predict, or we're able to get the subtleties and the nuances and the inferences. So again, we come back to the processing there. We have to be able to build that up and get it faster and more accurate. A lot of kids do really well in maths up to about 8 or 9 years of age, and then the worded questions become more and more difficult for them to read and understand. And so maths can sometimes suffer as well. And of course, later on, most other subjects will suffer if you can't read or if you can't read accurately. So we need to be able to build up. Let me see if I can move this a little bit. We need to be able to, the text here is cat, but you can't see it on my screen. So it's cat. So to decode cat, we need to be, to decode that, we have to visually process it, which means we have to be able to see it. But also we have to phonologically process it or decode it. So cat, the speed at which we process it as well is very, very important. So if a child is, trying to sound it out, cat, never actually makes cat, or it takes so long to make out the word when you put all those sounds together that it's taken too long. And so again, then the working memory doesn't engage and absorb it. So the rate at which the child processes the words, or the rate at which he decodes, is very, very important. So we need to work on the decoding first of all, of course, but then making the decoding happen as automatically as possible, and engaging the memory in order to identify the word and match it to a picture of a cat. Now, another thing here is that we have to be able to sequence those letters and the sounds within that word cat. So we don't read tack instead of cat, So all of the cognitive skills, again, you have to concentrate while you're reading. All of the cognitive skills are required for good reading. And reading is something that doesn't come automatically. It has to be learned. So the reading is very important. The decoding is very important. We have to have good cognitive skills to access the code, to learn the code in order to decode the code. And then we need to decode quickly. And that's called fluency. When we start to decode quickly, we'll engage the working memory, and then we'll understand a lot more. With writing, again, maths, memory, attention, processing, and sequencing, very important for writing. Writing is a bit like speech. We have to process our thoughts. We have to sequence our thoughts. We have to structure our sentences with a beginning, middle, and an end. And we have to now think of the spellings and the grammar and the punctuation. And so it requires, good sequencing skills for grammar, to add the bits onto the end, or the bits at the beginning, or is it the past tense? Is it the future tense? Is it the present tense? Punctuation as well needs good sequencing skills, good processing skills, and good sequencing skills. Spelling needs processing, sequencing. It also needs good memory. Now, a lot of parents would say to us, well, my child gets 9 out of 10 in his Friday exam every week. But then when he goes to write his sentences, or he goes to use those spellings in sentences a week or two later, he's forgotten them. So we need to learn the spellings. We need good working memory to do that, but we need to transfer those spellings to the short-term memory and to the long-term memory so that we remember them and we can use them going forward. Now, in Neuron Learning, we use two programs, Fast Forward and Reading Assistant Plus. Now, Fast Forward, all of our children would start on foundation components to build up their memory, attention, processing, and sequencing. And there are 2 foundation components for primary school kids, and there are 2 they're different. There are 2 foundation components for teenagers in secondary school. And then the kids would work on reading components. Now, the foundation components build up those cognitive skills, build up listening skills, and we see as a consequence of that, the speech and storytelling improves. They would then move on to reading components within the Fast Forward family of components, and those are assigned to kids based on their reading age or their reading ability. And in those, they would work on reading comprehension, spelling, grammar, and punctuation. And then, so they get a lot of work under their belts before they move on to Reading Assistant Plus. And that's the fluency component. And in Reading Assistant Plus, they will work on building up their fluency, how many words correct they can read per minute. They'll build up their vocabulary, pronunciation, and comprehension. In Fast Forward, in the first component, students will complete between 35 and 45,000 trials. So it's a very intense workout for the brain. And in one sitting, they'll respond to hundreds of trials. So it's a very intense, specialized component. Now, only Fast Forward addresses cognitive skills and reading skills simultaneously. So while kids work on the first few components, which focus on the attention and the processing and the memory and the sequencing and verbal reasoning, good listening, they're also working on language and reading skills. So the phonological awareness is being developed, phonics and decoding, word recognition, vocabulary acquisition, background knowledge, conventions, and language structure. So it's all kind of loose when they start, but it gets tighter and tighter and tighter as they progress through the different components, and it becomes automatic and they become skilled readers. That's our goal. In the first component for the younger kids, so from 6 to 12-year-olds, they will work on, there's 7 exercises, and a selection of those are presented every day. And here you can see that all of the exercises work on most of the cognitive skills. And then there'll be, different, each exercise would specialize in other areas like English grammar, word structure, listening accuracy, word recognition, or they might work on following directions, taking instructions, memory, listening accuracy. So they have, each exercise specializes not only in the cognitive skills, but other auditory skills as well. That's in the first component. And the second component is a more advanced version of the first. And then they move on to the reading components. The older kids, you can see here that the graphics are a little more suitable for older kids. Same skills are being developed, both in the cognitive side of things, but also in English language and language side and the listening and language side of things. After they've completed the 2 foundation components, they will move on to reading components. And again, they continue to work on building up the cognitive skills, but now they're working on the phonological awareness, word structure and knowledge, high frequency words, their spelling exercise, their reading comprehension exercises. They are very, there is a whole holistic approach to training the brain to read and learn. Read and understand what you're reading and learn. And then again, for the teenagers, the graphics are more appropriate and the content is more appropriate for their ages. So parents then, every week, their kids work 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week. And every week they get a set of reports. And those reports go out on a Saturday or a Sunday. And so here you can see that this child has done very well. And she has responded to all of the exercises nicely over about 28, 29 day period. Now, this isn't always the case. Some kids might really struggle with a processing exercise such as Skygym, which is the red line here. And so you might see that plateauing for a while. And if that's the case, then we need to go in and see what's going on there. Why is it plateauing? Is the child struggling? And we need to do little interventions then to help the child get it. And without the child it has to be the child's response all the time. We cannot tell the child the answer because the program adapts to each individual. And so based on the responses each child gives, they will progress accordingly. So in this case, this child took about almost 6 weeks to finish the first component. And usually children finish the second component in the same number of weeks. Also in the reports, we might see some errors. There are error reports, so we can see what kind of things the kids are struggling with. So this child, here we can see that she's struggling with singular and plural. The sheep are eating as opposed to the sheep is eating. And that was presented to her 20 times. She's got it wrong 5 times. So we need to go in there and try and help her understand why she's making that mistake, so that when she works on it the next time, she will be able to respond accurately. And the level of accuracy that's demanded is very high, and the children begin to realize that very quickly. So they start to focus on trying to respond accurately and trying to understand why they're making the mistakes they're making. Here, for example, which is the baby's bird. So she would have been presented with 2 pictures, a baby bird and the baby's bird. So she had to figure out, she had to click on the correct picture for this sentence, and she chose the wrong picture 7 times out of 28 trials. So we need to explain what apostrophe S means to her and to help her respond correctly the next time round. So the error reports are really helpful, and we do encourage parents to share the reports with the kids so they can see the fruits of their labour, and they can see how well they're doing, and they can see the kind of mistakes they're making, and they can learn from that. There's a usage report which shows us what exercises the children worked on every day. So we want to see all green circles, which is great. And this girl, her attendance and her participation have been really excellent. She's worked on everything presented to her every day. And then the blue dots show us what exercises are due to come up in the next week, which can be really useful if you want to sit with your child and do an intervention. So you can see what day you can sit with her. Then kids in each exercise they work on, they'll score some points. And here on this week, this girl got her best score to date, and we know that because there's a gold star on Monday, the 5th of November, in Hoop Knot, this particular exercise, which is a sound-based exercise where she has to differentiate between 2 very similar sounding sounds like ba, da, bay, day, those sort of sounds. She also did very well that week in another exercise and got a gold star in that. So kids love seeing their gold stars, and it is nice to share those with them and encourage them to try and beat their score, but accuracy is key. So we're always encouraging kids to focus on the accuracy, and then they can focus on the high scores. So we mentioned that when the kids have worked on building up the cognitive skills, and when the kids then move on to reading and reading comprehension and spelling, grammar and punctuation in the reading components, later they'll move on to the fluency components where they read aloud and they're recorded so they can hear themselves read. So initially they'll listen to a model reader, and then they'll read and they're recorded. And then while they're reading, the vocabulary is developed and the pronunciation is corrected if they pronounce words incorrectly. Also, there is a comprehension section where it's presented in a quiz-like format, and so we can see if they understand what it is that they're reading. So they put everything into practice, but also there's a huge emphasis on the fluency, how many words correct per minute they are able to read. And they become very conscious of this. This component is excellent too for vocabulary acquisition. So fluency, vocabulary, pronunciation, and comprehension are the four skills that are strengthened with Reading Assistant Plus. Now, to be a success, you must work at its success. It doesn't just happen. There's no magic wand, unfortunately. So fidelity to the protocol is very important. And the protocol is 30 minutes work a day by 5 times a week. And it can be any 5 days. So we usually kids will work at the weekends when they have more time. And then they'll choose maybe Friday, Saturday and Sunday. And then they'll choose maybe 2 days when they don't have after school activities during the week. Or some schools are happy to let kids work on it during resource time at school, or and they need, if they are working on it at school, the person supervising them at school does have to supervise them properly, and we would send reports to them as well. Now, this is some research that was done back in 2009, and fMRI scans were taken of kids who were struggling readers before they worked on Fast ForWord, and that's this scan here in the middle. And we can see that there's very little or no activity going on in the parts of the brain that are responsible for the cognitive skills and that are responsible for language and reading and learning. And so these kids were struggling. Not only were they struggling readers, but they were struggling learners. And after the kids worked on Fast ForWord, we can see that there's stimulation going on in the brain. Now, what happens when a child is working on Fast ForWord? I mentioned earlier that they would maybe complete between 35 and 45,000 trials in the first component. And what's happening is the brain is firing neurons, and those neurons or those brain cells are making connections with each other. And through the intensity and the frequency of the work, those connections become stronger and stronger. And so we see stimulation in the brain, in areas of the brain where there wasn't before. And this is the brain of a child who's not struggling and who is the typical reading child. And we can see that there's nice stimulation going on there as well. So we know that children who work on Fast ForWord and Reading Assistant Plus, that it does change the brain. And we can see that the brain becomes sensitized to the cognitive skills. So in summary, we need good memory, attention, processing, and sequencing. For all of these skills on the learning timeline, for good listening comprehension, both in class and at home and socially. We need good cognitive skills for speech and telling stories, and also for reading and reading comprehension, and for writing and learning. So the program addresses all of these areas. If any of your children have difficulties in any of these areas, these are the areas that the program will work to improve. Now, up to recently, Fast ForWord was one of the most researched programs in the world. There are over 300 research studies, and if you'd like to take a look at some of the research, you'll find it here. I've given the link here, and a recording of this will be going out. So if you want to check out the research, you can see it. This link will take you there. There's also a video on Fast ForWord and Reading Assistant Plus. If you want to tell somebody about this, or if you want to show it to teachers or friends or whatever, or just for your own benefit, there are some good videos here on Fast Forward and Reading Assistant Plus. Now tonight, for people who are registered to take part in this webinar, we are offering a discount. We sell 3-month licenses, and usually they cost €690 or £660. But tonight we're giving a 20% webinar discount. So it'll be €550 or £530 for a 3-month license. So if you'd like to purchase the program or the license to use the program, let us know, and we're very happy to give you a discount. So here are my contact details once again. You can see my email address there is joyce@neuronlearning.com, or if any of you would like to talk with me about your own child and the difficulties your child is experiencing, you can go to calendly.com/Joyce Kearns, and you can choose a time that suits you there to talk with me. So there we are. I hope you've enjoyed the webinar. I don't know if you have any questions, John. Are there any questions there that anyone has sent you?
No, you're okay. There's been a few that I've been able to answer directly in the chat room.
Okay.
Yes, anyway, hold on. I'll send them out the sales page so people can get more details about it.
Okay. So if you have any questions, you can email me on this email address, or again, you can call us if you wish, and we're very happy to answer any questions. John, as he said, will be sending out a sales page if anyone is interested in signing up for the program for their child. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.